Hello, my name is Catherine Metayer. I am faculty at the School of Public Health, University of California, Berkeley, and I am the director of the Center for Integrative Research on Childhood Leukemia and the Environment. The goal of my research is to better understand what causes leukemia and other cancers in children. In this video, I'm going to give you an overview of the impact of radiation on the development of cancer in children. I will first go over general information on the various types and sources of radiation we may be exposed to in our daily lives. Then I will present data from studies of ionizing and non-ionizing radiation and childhood cancer risk. I will wrap up with key takeaways. This graph shows the sources and types of radiation based on the wavelength and frequency energy, from long wavelength and low energy to the left of the graph in blue, to decreasing wavelength and increasing energy in the middle of the graph and towards the right. There are two types of radiation, non-ionizing and ionizing radiation. Ionizing radiation has enough energy to remove electrons from atoms and molecules and produce ions, which in turn can cause cellular and organ damages. Ionizing radiation is a well-established human carcinogen, even at low levels. Sources of ionizing radiation include UV light, X-rays used in medical imaging, as well as gamma and radon background radiation. In contrast, non-ionizing radiation does not have enough energy to remove electrons from atoms and molecules. Types and sources of non-ionizing radiation includes, for example, electromagnetic fields from power lines and cell phones. The health impact of non-ionizing radiation may vary depending on the exposure level, and carcinogenicity is not as well established as for ionizing radiation. In general, organs with active cell division like hematological and reproductive systems are the most sensitive to ionizing radiation, whereas muscles, bones, and nerves are less sensitive. Also, fetuses and young children are highly sensitive to ionizing radiation. The doses of radiation we may be exposed to vary according to the source, whether it is from personal, residential, or work-related activities. This figure shows the ranges of doses from various sources. And I would like to bring your attention to medical imaging like CT scan that emits doses that are 4 times higher than natural background radiation and 70 times higher than doses from a chest X-ray. Not only CT scans emit high-dose radiation, but their use has dramatically increased in the early 2000s, now representing almost half of the sources of radiation exposure. This trend has been seen not only for adults but also children, with a peak of exposure to CT scan in the mid-2000s and a slight decrease in the later years following awareness about potential harmful health effects. In the next slides, I will cover the cancer risk in children associated with early life exposure to ionizing radiation. Note that prenatal exposure to radiation is rare nowadays because of the strict protection of pregnant women and fetuses. One of the first comprehensive investigations of CT scan exposure and risk of childhood cancers was conducted in the UK. In this retrospective cohort study, organ doses were reconstructed using medical record data. The results showed consistent dose-response relationship with leukemia and brain tumors. The higher the dose, the higher the risk, as shown in those two figures. These early results were later replicated in several individual studies and a meta-analysis that was published in 2021. 2 new large cohort studies were also published in 2025. One was conducted in the United States and Canada, where the authors estimated that about 10% of hematologic cancers may have been attributed to radiation exposure from medical imaging, with higher estimates seen from high-dose CT scan. Similarly, another study conducted in 9 countries in Europe concluded that for every 10,000 children who receive a mean dose of 8 milligray, 1 to 2 persons were expected to develop a hematological malignancy attributable to radiation exposure in the following 12 years. Next, I will review childhood cancer risk and exposure to natural background radiation such as gamma and radon, that are the second most important source of ionizing radiation after medical imaging. Gamma and radon radiation widely varies in different parts of the world, with highest levels seen in China, India, and Iran. As shown in this map, there are also geographical differences in background radon within the United States, with highest levels seen in the Midwest, Northwest, and Northeast. Both gamma and radon radiation are carcinogenic to humans, mainly leading to lung cancer in adults. But what do we know about cancer risk in children? To assess retrospectively, exposure to radon can be challenging, and researchers use various sources such as radon monitoring data. In a large epidemiologic study recently conducted in the United States, leukemia was found to be associated with residential radon exposure, but there was no association with other types of cancer. These results were consistent with a comprehensive meta-analysis showing dose-response relationships between estimated radon levels in the homes and risk of childhood leukemia. The researchers pulled data from case control studies as shown on the left plot, and from ecological cohort studies as shown on the right plot. Each design has its strength and limitation in terms of selection and exposure classification biases and adjustment for confounders. However, in both instances, the risk of developing leukemia increased with increasing level of radon, with a higher level of confidence from case control data. Now let's switch to non-ionizing radiation. The main sources of exposure to extremely low-frequency electromagnetic field, which we call ELF, EMF, are proximity to power lines and wireless phones. Even though there is some evidence of carcinogenicity in animal studies, data for humans are less clear, likely because, again, it's difficult to accurately assess exposure. Early individual and pooled studies show that high level of ELF-EMF increase the risk of childhood leukemia. Based on these findings, along with animal and mechanistic studies, the International Agency for Research on Cancer concluded in 2002 that ELF-EMF was a possible carcinogen to human, group 2. However, 20 years later, an updated pooled analysis of childhood leukemia studies did not replicate the earlier findings. Regarding cellular phone use, 2 large studies in the United States and Europe did not lead to conclusive findings for childhood brain tumors. Some have criticized the study designs that could have underestimated the risk. Lastly, exposure to UV light has been studied in the context of cancer other than skin. There are potential carcinogenic pathways that could lead to childhood leukemia through production of vitamin D that could alter cell growth and differentiation, as well as immune regulation. However, results from epidemiologic studies of childhood cancer risk to date are not consistent. Overall, there's a wealth of studies that have investigated possible association between all sorts of radiation exposure and the risk of cancer in children. In summary, we can say that CT scans are a major source of radiation, and positive association with childhood leukemia and brain tumors have been consistently reported. Also, it seems that evidence is mounting between background radon exposure and increased risk of childhood leukemia. In contrast, results for EMF and UV light radiation exposures remain inconsistent. These type of studies are difficult to conduct and are under high scrutiny because of possible selection and exposure classification biases. This being said, there are opportunities to monitor and reduce exposure to radiation in our daily lives which in turn could contribute to the reduction of childhood cancer.